This is task 2E part 3, where you're asked to produce evidence to explain how the save button was implemented. So if we go back up, we can then see what will happen. A save button should be added. We've added the button and it's got to carry out the following in this order shown. So we're going to have a macro that will check all that input data has been entered. We're then going to have a look and see, have a confirmation message to actually say, yes, has been entered, so we're going to save it. It will then save the quote with a different file name, and the number part of the quote, that's this bit here, will be increased by 1. If any data is missing, we're going to get an error message that says it's not there. So we're going to decompose the problem into 4 stages. The first one being, let's just look and see if we can find out whether or not all the data has been input. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new presence check. I need to unlock it, don't we? So if we just unprotect the sheet, and I'll just scroll across so we've got some space, because it's going to be quite a big formula here. We'll call this a presence check. And what this is going to do is it's going to check to see whether any of the input data is blank. Is blank function. Well, let's just start by having a look and seeing whether or not the forename is blank. So I'm going to say, is blank forename? Close bracket. Now it's saying false because it's not blank. So that's good. That's working so far. Let's see if I delete the forename. Okay, it's now saying it's true because it is blank. So we'll put that data back. And now what we need to do is we now need to do this for all of the others. And we can do this inside a big OR function. So we're going to say OR. So any of these, if any of these are blank, it will return and tell us true, yes, there's a problem, there's something blank. So we're going to have is blank forename. Then we're going to do exactly the same for surname, and we can see it's come up there for us. Then exactly the same for the hire date. These are all our inputs, if you remember. And then exactly the same, and what we'll do is we'll just show we can do it this way as well, for the date of return. And again, is blank, and we'll do the depot. Another is blank, and we'll have estate. Another is blank, the youngest driver age. You can see how this is getting a bit repetitive now. And the number of accidents. Now what we'll do is we'll pause there at that point. We'll close our OR as well, because we'll have a look at these two in a moment. So that's saying false. It's good because nothing's blank. Let's just remove one thing and see what happens. It's saying true because one of them is blank. Now, this presence check asks us to check all the input values. Another presence check you might do might only be asking you to do some input values. So just be careful that you read the question carefully. But what we need to do now is have a look at this, and we need to include within here the results, the cell links of the conviction points, and also the number of drivers. Now it looks like I forgot to unclose that OR bracket there, so just remove that bracket and put the end of the OR here, and it's still coming up as false. Now if I remove one of these, look, it comes up as true. Put some conviction points back in, and it comes back up as false. Now that's saying that our presence check is fine because it's checked and that there's nothing blank, because we're asking the question, is there anything that's blank? So what we've done so far is have checked that all the data has been entered. But we now need to do these confirmation messages, and this is where OCR have been really naughty in the real coursework, because the only way to do this is to use VBA code. and that's Visual Basic for applications. Now you haven't got time to learn several different languages and all the different programming techniques that go along with it. This is an A-level in IT, not an A-level in programming, and so I'm going to be very, very similar in what we do here in terms of the real coursework, because as long as you can get the idea of how to use the programming, if you can apply it in the other coursework, you're well worthy of the marks. So we need another macro. So we'll just go back to our quote worksheet. It doesn't really actually record a new macro. I'm going to name it save quote. Click on OK, and I'm going to stop it straight away. And the reason for that is because we need to actually put the code in. We can't actually do it by going through a process. So what I'll do at this point, because you can get your marks for assigning it to the save button, is I'll assign that save quote now to the save button, and let's just click it, make sure it works, nothing goes wrong. It's really important that we check as we go through that nothing goes wrong. So what we're going to do now is have a look at that macro. So if we click on macros and we edit it, we now get to see what the macro is doing. So it says here, okay, it's just a save quote macro. That's what it is. Doesn't do anything else at the moment. So we're just going to set a couple of what we call variables up, and these are our values that we'll be able to use within our macro. We need to have a variable that refers to the presence check, and we also need to have a variable that will identify what the file name is going to be. So before we continue, I'm going to name this cell here quote ref, because that's what it needs to be called. Okay, so that will be called quote ref, and I can now make reference to that. So I'm going to create this new variable called this file. Okay, and I'm going to say that this file will be equal to, we take from range what will be quote ref, and I need to put that in speech marks, and what that does is that will assign the value from here to this variable called this file, as long as I put on the end dot value to say that it's the value of that cell that I want. But as well as that, we also need to add on the file name, which will be .xlsm. It needs to stay as a macro because we can't change the file type, and it does say that it will be saved using the quote reference number as the file name. Now the other variable that we need to set up is a variable to check to make sure that we've got this presence check. So over here, I'm going to name this presence check so I can make reference to it, and I'm going to have another variable here that's called check blank. That's what we're doing, we're checking to see if there's any blank values, equals range presence check. And what that will do is it will assign the value of presence check to this variable called check blank. So this doesn't actually do anything at the moment, and what we're going to do is we're just going to run it and just make sure that no errors come up, and the fact that no errors come up, that's good. And I'm going to just put a couple of comments in here to explain what this is doing. Okay, so so this assigns the quote reference to variable this file. Okay, and this next line here, just lost that speech mark for a moment there. This assigns, okay, the presence check to check blank variable. Okay, so we've got listed as we go along what we're doing, and we're annotating as we go along what we're actually doing in this work. So the next thing I want to show you is an error message that might appear when you run it at this stage. So I'm going to click on save and you get this. It says compile error, variable not defined, and it's highlighted this file. It can't work out what does this file mean, and that's because normally in VBA you would be expected to declare what a variable is and set its data type. What you might find is if that's the case, you'll see this code option explicit, and all you need to do is remove that code, okay, and then it doesn't require that to happen. So removing that code solves that problem. What we're going to do now is set up a basic selection structure known as an if block that will decide which way we're going to go, whether we have had any blank data or whether there hasn't been any blank data. So we're going to say if check blank is true. Now I could put equals true, but we can just say if check blank because it's a Boolean value. So if check blank, so if that's true, then what we're going to do is we're going to run some code. So I'll just put a comment here to say code to run if there is a blank input cell. Okay. If not, so else, we'll run the code to run if all input cells have values in them. So if then else, and we then need to end if, which is a little bit like closing the brackets of an if function. And again, this shouldn't do anything yet because we haven't actually put anything in there, but if I click on save, I can just make sure that there's no errors coming up. So what we can now do is start to put in the message boxes. So we need to have, okay, at the moment we've checked if all input data has been entered, then and if any input data is missing, we'll have an error message displayed to inform the user that information is missing. Let's do that bit then. So the code that we need for that, and I'm just indenting it to make it easier to read, is a message box. And the message box is basically just going to say some information is missing. And what I'm going to do again is just put above here, okay, that says display error message. And then again here we need to add confirmation message. So if there isn't anything blank, we need to display a confirmation message. So display confirmation message, and again we'll have message box, and this time we'll put quote is being saved. So at this stage what we have achieved is to say that if there's anything that's blank, we'll have a message box that says some information is missing. So that's this here. If any input data is missing, an error message should be displayed to inform the user that information is missing. Otherwise, well, if all the input cells have got values in, then we'll have a message that says the quote is being saved. So we've done this part, and then we've got to do them in the order stated. Now at this stage we need to test again and see whether this is going to work. So let's click on the save button. Brilliant, quote is being saved. So it has gone through this else part because there wasn't any information missing. Let's just delete part of the information. Brilliant. If check blank, so if there is anything blank, give the message box that says some information is missing. So we'll just put Woodward back in there now. Okay, so let's have a look at the next bit. It says a copy of the quote will be saved using the quote reference number as the file name. Well, we've already sorted the file name because we called it here this file equals range quote ref. Well, that was this bit here. We notice we called that quote ref, takes a value from there and adds on .xlsm. So the code to do this is to save a copy of the file, and we start by using the active workbook because that's what we're using. This is the active workbook, so we write active workbook, and then we pick one of the commands that we can use for an active workbook, and the command that we want to use here is save copy as. Okay. Now if we were to use save, it would replace what we've got, and that means then that we're not going to be able to increment this value without messing up or having a separate copy of the file. It wouldn't give it the separate file name. If we use save as, yes, it would give us the new file name, but it wouldn't then prepare us for the next quote. So using save copy as means that it keeps this version open of, well, I've called it 2e interface.xlsm, but it saves another copy as, and then I need to specify what the file name is going to be. So I put file name : equals, so the file name will become whatever the value of this file is, and that's this file. So let's see if it works. We'll save that and let's run it. Okay, so this quote is being saved. Now the trick is, has it actually saved it? I'm just going to pause for a moment. Okay, so the reason I paused was to get this up here. This is my documents, and just wanted to show you that it has saved it, and the file name is mw2016-1.xlsm, which is what we expected here, because we expected it to get from quote ref there and add on .xlsm. Now, although my file isn't actually saved in my documents, mine's actually saved in the desktop, it's still saved it in my documents anyway. I found there's been varying results with this. Sometimes it saves it in the folder that you're working in, sometimes it saves it in my documents. It doesn't matter, the question doesn't specify where it's got to be saved, so we don't need to worry about that too much, but we know that it's saved, so that's great. We'll just what we'll do is we'll keep that around. I'll just minimize it for now, and we've done this. We've been able to save a copy of the quote. So now what we need to do is increment the number part of the quote. So you see here we've got quote reference. What we need to do is we need to increment the number 1. Well, that comes from current quote, which is here. That is named current quote. So what we need to do is increase that value by 1. Well, we do that by specifying the value we want to change. So we're going to use a range that specifies a specific location, like we did here and like we did here. And the range that we're using is current quote, okay, because that's the named cell up here. And we want to change its value, and we want its value to become equal to whatever its current value is plus 1. So I'm just going to copy and paste that and put plus 1. And what that should do now is increase the value by 1, but it will do it after it's saved the copy. So the original quote will be MW 2016-1, then it will prepare itself ready for the next quote, which will be 2. So let's try it and let's see what happens. So I'll click on save. Quote is being saved. Look, we've gone up to 2, and if we have a look here, we've moved up to 2. Let's put a new name in. We just want to see if things work the way they should do. So our quote reference has changed. So again, let's save. Quote is being saved. That's gone up to 3. What we need to check now is whether it's saved the JJ file. So I'll just pause for a second. And I'm back with you just to show you there. There's that JJ file, JJ 2016-2.xlsm. So it's picked up the file name. Remember, that was number 2, but here we're ready for quote number 3. What you've got to do now is annotate everything. So you saw how I was annotating as we were going along. We need to annotate these two as well to explain what they do. So you need to put some comments in there. Then you'll be able to screenshot your macro and show how you actually achieved it. Make sure that you do the steps in the order. Show any new named cells that you've used, as we have used some named cells. Test the macro again. Make sure it's still working. show how you assign to the save button, and of course the annotation of the code. You don't have to do it like this. You can just put some text boxes or handwrite some comments on. I just find that this way is easier. Now this is task 2, part 1 completed. So when we move on to part 2, we're looking at a completely different spreadsheet, which you can actually do before this part. Well done if you got this far, because this is way beyond what you expected to know for the syllabus.